Abraham set out in faith and he continued to walk in faith. Hebrews 11, verse 9 reads, "By faith, Abraham made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise." What can we learn from Abraham's example about continuing to walk by faith? Don't expect instant results. Don't get too comfortable in one place. Be ready to camp out on God's promises. Once Abraham arrived in the land of Canaan, God gave him the promise of the land. However, the promise was for the future, not the present. God told Abraham in Genesis 12, verse 7, "To your offspring I will give this land." It was not for Abraham, but Abraham's descendants who would later receive the land. But this future aspect of God's promise did not deter Abraham. He made his home like a stranger in the promised land. He lived there in tents. God unfolded his plan over a long period of time. There was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then Joseph, then 400 years in Egypt, then Moses, then 40 years in the wilderness, and then finally under Joshua, God fulfilled his promise to Abraham. "To your offspring I will give this land." That meant a lot of walking by faith in the meantime. And part of walking by faith means you need to adjust to God's timetable. Do not expect instant results. We don't like to wait for anything. We want results and we want it now. But that is not always the way God works. God lives outside of time. 2 Peter 3 verse 8 says, "With the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." Psalm 90 verse 4 reads, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night." So if you're going to continue to walk by faith, we have to learn to wait on God's timing. Next, Abraham made his home like a stranger. It's a word normally used for aliens or refugees. He never became a citizen of any particular city. Acts 7, verse 5 says, God gave him no inheritance, not even a foot of ground. When his wife Sarah died, he had no place to bury her, so he had to purchase a plot of ground from the Hittites. Genesis 23, verse 4. God had promised him the land, but he didn't know when and he didn't know how, so he pitched tents and kept himself mobile, flexible, open, ready to move at God's command. When we follow God's leading, we should also be ready to camp out on God's promises. What does it mean to camp out on God's promises? It means staying with God for the long run. You stay in God's word. You keep steady in prayer. You remain faithful in Christian fellowship. You continue to trust God and to follow his leading. No matter how long the wait, no matter how difficult the obstacles, no matter how unclear the path, God is faithful. He will keep his word, and we need to just follow him all the way through. It means you practice a stubborn faith and you set up a tent city on the promises of God. Joshua 21, verse 45 reads, "Not one of all the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled." So pitch your tent on the promises of God and learn to wait patiently for God's fulfillment. Be blessed.